It's Friday, which means it's time for Friday Finds. And if you're new here, I hope that you love archaeology, ancient history, and more just as much as I do. Because my name is Dr. Tendra Kellenberger, and I bring the ancient world to you. Because this is not Ancient Aliens, this is the real thing. And these, of course, are the Dirt Diaries Friday Finds. And yes, when I am recording this video, Dirt Diaries is coming back next week. The podcast, you guys, is coming back from its break. And we're actually going to have video this time, which I am super excited about. But let's go ahead and jump into some of the finds that have come out for the entire month of January. Because there's a lot to cover and the list just keeps growing and growing every single day. But we got to talk about some of my favorite finds to come out this month. But of course, drop below what your favorite find was. Do you agree with what scholars and archaeologists are saying? Let me know below. So first up, it's kind of a 2-for-1, really. We're talking about the first emperor of China. Really, we have two kind of news things coming out. One, recently, or more recent, I should say, coming out concerning the mercury of the first emperor of China that's flowing in his tomb. Where is it coming from? Where is the origin coming from? And the second is actually a find that was found in one of the pits that houses the Terracotta warriors. So let's dive into the mercury first. Because, why mercury first? Because mercury back in the ancient day and age was believed to be part of the elixir to immortality. That's right. And on his quest to try and find the keys to immortality, Emperor Qin Shi Huang was known to consume mercury. And of course, today we know mercury is super toxic, so it likely didn't elongate his life. Rather, it probably cut it very short. But now archaeological surveys in Chunyang may reveal the origins of the mercury that is said to be housed inside his tomb. Now, a bit of a spark note version for everybody so that we can all be up to speed on, Qin Shi Huang, his mausoleum, terracottas, and more. So Qin Shi Huang is actually credited with unifying China and is known as China's first emperor. He ended up conquering all these states. He was from the state of Qin, and by conquering all of the other states, he actually ended the period of the warring states. And as an emperor, he commissioned a massive burial complex that not only includes his mausoleum, but all of the pits that house the terracotta warriors. We also have acrobats, musicians, and more. And all of these individuals were meant to accompany him on his journey to the afterlife. So, this new research proposes that the mines in Chunyang produced the mercury. And these mines that would have been active during this period are known to have mercury sulfide ore, also known as cinnabar. And this region has a long history of not only mining for cinnabar, but also smelting it, which, yes, is also extremely toxic. From reports and news outlets, including China Times, archaeologists have narrowed down 3 locations in this region, and they are up on the screen for you because I am not going to butcher those pronunciations. And these 3 sites are not only associated with mining, but with the trading of cinnabar as well. And artifacts recovered from these sites date anywhere from the Neolithic period all the way through the Qing dynasty. So it is showing continuous mining for thousands of years. And a really cool find includes the finding of a Qin rope motif roof tile, suggesting that yes, these mines were active during the Qin dynasty, which places us right where we need to be for the first emperor and the construction of his mausoleum. Now, 2 of the 3 sites were near transportation routes, and they also have evidence of being part of a much larger trade system. And the connection between the mines in Chunyang and the burial complex of the first emperor tells us so much. It tells us about ancient mining techniques. It also tells us about how these resources were transported, and also points to much larger trade networks occurring during the Qin dynasty, which is so cool because I have studied the trade of ancient metals, specifically in the Eastern Mediterranean during the Bronze Age. And what we are seeing here is that resources are being actively sought after for burials and monumental construction. So much care, so much energy, and so much effort and resources went into this construction, which makes sense from the descriptions of his tomb, which does include the description pertaining to rivers of mercury. And also, of course, the the tangential news that came out, I believe, at the end of last year pertains to the Terracotta Army, specifically because archaeologists have unearthed a Terracotta commander. Now, this is cool on its own, but it gets even cooler when you take into consideration that only 10 commanders have ever been recovered. Meanwhile, we have over 7,000 warriors unearthed from these pits. And he was found in pieces, but thanks to the silt that it was buried in, that environment actually allowed for the preservation of paint on the commander. Yes, all of the terracotta warriors, commanders, and more, including acrobats and musicians that have been uncovered, they were painted because, yes, the ancient world was full of color. And he was recovered in Pit 2, but he was not recovered alone. He was found alongside 2 other high-ranking military officers, as well as the remains of a horse and chariot. And due to his position within Pit 2, scholars actually believe that he was the highest-ranking officer in that military unit, which is so cool. But, from China, we got to go hop, skip, and a jump over to France because we have some Roman era news that is pretty cool because we have some Roman curse tablets that were found, including one that bears an extinct language. So back in 2022, archaeologists actually began excavations underneath an 18th century hospital in Orleans, France. And as they were excavating, they found that what lay underneath was a much older Roman necropolis. And this necropolis had over 60 graves. And these 60 graves, well, they're a little bit odd because they only have men buried in them. They were placed in a row, which is kind of weird, especially for Roman cemeteries. And all of these graves were found lined up against a wall. And yes, some of these graves did have curse tablets in them because placing them in a grave is pretty normal. So yeah, if you needed to write a curse tablet back, in ancient Greece or ancient Rome, you would not only write it down, but then you would actually place it in either a well or a grave. Why, you might be wondering? It's to make sure that the underworld gods hear your request. Now, to write one, if you were interested, well, you'd grab some lead. But we also have evidence of gold sheets also being used, but mostly you're going to go for lead because it's more accessible to more people back in the ancient day and age. And when you are writing your curse on it, the letters are actually going to reflect silver back at you. So it's a really cool effect. So after you write it the certain way, in the certain form, to the certain gods that you would need, well, maybe you might draw an image of the person that you are trying to curse. You might include some hair or nails of that individual as well, just to make sure that the curse is going after the correct person. And then you're going to roll that puppy up. And after you do that, you might tie some knots around it. You might stab it with some nails, whatever floats your boat. So for this curse tablet specifically, scholars used reflectance transformation imaging on one such tablet. And by doing this technique, it actually allowed the scholars to digitally unroll the tablet so that the tablet doesn't get damaged during the process. It's very similar to what is actually being done with the scrolls from Herculaneum, where scholars are actually digitally unrolling it so that it doesn't get damaged or just disintegrate in front of our eyes because of how old and how delicate these remains are. And this curse tablet that had the imaging done on it was actually discovered in between the legs of a man. It was actually found next to a vase and some coins that he was also buried with. The Latin inscription was also accompanied by a few words written in Gaulish, which is an extinct Celtic language. And it invokes Mars, the Roman god of war. And it curses quite a few people. And yes, before you ask, it has been translated. So, without further ado, here is what it says. To Mars the royal who pierces names, it is bewitchment of these men and women below who accomplished the unfortunate and unjust feat, and those who were accomplices of these men and women. And then, following this eerie inscription, we get the list of men and women who were, being cursed and to have justice enacted upon them. And basically, what a curse tablet is trying to do is to enact justice if somebody has been wronged, and there's different types of curses going on in the Greco-Roman world. And X-ray tomography is actually being used right now to digitally unroll a second curse tablet. And yes, scholars are currently working on translating more of the over 20 curse tablets. And I believe the excavation is actually ending this month, so hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get more news. And so from France, we actually got to move all the way over to Turkey, to the site of Ephesus, because this news is tangentially related to Cleopatra. Now, how is it related to Cleopatra? Well, because remains that were long believed to belong to her half-sister, Arsinoe IV, may not actually belong to her. The skeleton of an individual long believed to be Arsinoe IV turns out to not actually belong to the Ptolemaic heir, but to an adolescent boy. So these remains were found at the site of Ephesus back in 1929, and they were found in a marble sarcophagus in a building known as the Octagon of Ephesus. And fun fact, Ephesus is also well known for its massive temple to Artemis, which this will come back into play. And this burial came with no inscriptions, nothing but the remains inside. So archaeologists at the time, well, they believed that this burial belonged to a prominent young woman. And what prominent young woman was at the site of Ephesus? None other than Cleopatra's half-sister, Arsinoe IV. And why would they just place her sister randomly here? Well, it's because she died at the site. Yes, a Spark Note version as to why this occurred and then how we ended up at that site is that during the 1st century BCE, Cleopatra and her siblings had a Game of Thrones. So her younger half-sister actually took up arms against Cleopatra. And this actually led to the siege of Alexandria in 48 and 47 BCE. Well, long story short, she lost, and therefore she went and sought asylum at the temple to Artemis at Ephesus. A few years later, after the death of Caesar, Mark Antony actually ordered her execution when she was 22 years old. So, radiocarbon analysis was done on these skeletal remains, and it places these remains to 205 to 36 BCE. Okay, that's exactly where we want to be with Arsinoe IV. But this changes when analysis shows that the remains of this individual are between the ages of 11 and 14 years old, which is much younger than that of the 22-year-old Arsinoe. And repeated tests to the skull and the femur actually show the presence of a Y chromosome. So this actually points to a young male rather than a 22-year-old female. But after researchers found this, well, they had a few flags raised because these bones were extremely fragile, so they ran more tests to figure out why that was, and they found some missed deformities that were previously unseen. One such deformity was one of the cranial sutures, which is the squiggly lines on your skull, was already closed on this individual, which is weird. Why? Because that doesn't happen until we are at least 65 years or older. So why would a young adolescent boy have this already occurring? And this early closure in their skull would have actually caused the skull to be asymmetrical. There were also abnormalities found to both the upper and lower jaw. One possibility for what was causing this is actually a rare genetic disorder, now called Treacher-Collins syndrome, which can actually hinder the development of the face. So a lot of the abnormalities that scholars and scientists were seeing in this individual fits Treacher-Collins syndrome. But to make sure that they were accurately diagnosing this individual, they ran more tests. Unfortunately, the segments of DNA that they had were insufficient to prove it. So what we know for sure from this is that 1, these remains do not belong to Arsinoe IV. They do belong to an adolescent boy, but why this individual was buried in a prominent place at the site of Ephesus remains currently unknown. And what is also currently unknown is where the remains of Cleopatra's half-sister currently reside. We have no current leads on it. Which with this, I'm really interested to see what else comes out. Maybe they will find more with a re-examination of the excavation from 1929. And moving just south from Turkey, we gotta head to Egypt because archaeologists discovered a 4,100-year-old tomb of a doctor who may have treated the pharaoh. So this tomb, well, it's a mastaba. It was actually found at the site of Saqqara, which was well known to house tombs not only of pharaohs, but of other high-ranking officials. And good news, bad news. Bad news is this tomb was robbed in antiquity, meaning everything was taken, including the body. But the good news is that we have incredible preservations of wall paintings in this tomb. Like, can we just get a moment for these wall paintings? They are gorgeous and vibrant, and you almost forget that they're over 4,000 years old. And if you're wondering who this doctor was, well, we do have a name. His name was Tete-Nebufu, and we also have his titles. He was the chief physician, he was the chief palace physician, the chief dentist, the director of medicinal plants, and was a conjurer of the goddess Serket. Now break out your mythology books, everybody, because Serket is a goddess who is associated with scorpions. In fact, she was actually believed to protect individuals from their bites, which may suggest that Tete-Nebufu was actually a doctor who treated venomous bites of scorpions. So with all of these titles of Tetsnebufu, we know that he was at the top of his profession, hence why he likely was able to treat the pharaoh. But which pharaoh, you might be wondering? Well, if you have your Egyptian king list readily available, whip those puppies out, because we gotta go back 4,100 years ago. And 4,100 years ago, give or take a few decades, is going to put us around the reign of Pepi II. Now, Pepi II ruled during Dynasty 6 of Egypt's Old Kingdom. Dynasty 6 is actually the last dynasty of the Old Kingdom. After Dynasty 6, Dynasty 7 actually begins the first intermediate period in Egypt. So it's believed, or postulated, I should say, that Tetsnebufu may have served Pepi II, or perhaps an early ruler from the first intermediate period, or, in other words, from Dynasty 7. Now, we got to go back to the artwork because as an art historian, we love when artwork is preserved, and these paints are so vibrant. So let's talk about it. We have a red painted ceiling, which is actually intended to resemble red granite blocks, which was a well-known building material. And of course, all of these paintings, all of these texts, all of the inscriptions that are left in the tomb unveil new insights into the daily life of the Old Kingdom. And such a cool find. I don't know about you, but these were some of my top finds this month. Drop below which one you liked the most. I don't know if I can pick my favorite for the month of January. I don't know if I could. But with that being said, Dirt Diaries podcast returns next week. We are back on video. We are doing some new things. I'm super excited to be back with each and every one of you. And of course, if you're looking for more archaeology, ancient history, mythology, mystery, and more, you can go ahead and join all your ancient history friends over on Patreon. And hey, if you actually want to come and see the Terracotta Army or the mausoleum of the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, you can travel with me, an archaeologist and art historian, as we travel to China this September. We're doing the Forbidden City. We are doing the Great Wall of China, and yes, the Terracotta Warriors, just to name a few things. It is everything Beijing and Xi'an. So come on an incredible trip of a lifetime. I'm so excited. But as always, keep your books open, stay curious, and I will see you guys next time on the Dirt Diaries.